Good afternoon. My name is Anne Kivlin and I'm one of the heads of inspection with His Majesty's Inspectorate of Education. Welcome to an in-conversation with colleagues from Falkirk Council, where we will hear about examples of effective practice identified during a recent national thematic where we looked at local authority approaches to supporting school improvement. HM inspectors visited all 32 local authorities to look at how local authorities support schools to improve. In today's in-conversation, we're going to hear from Falkirk Council colleagues who will talk about their council's approach to supporting improvement through self-evaluation and quality assurance. We'll hear more about how the development of quality associates enhances the local authority's universal and targeted support for schools. Colleagues, if I could just ask you to introduce yourselves. If we begin with Lisa.
Hello, my name's Lisa McCabe. I'm a Quality Improvement Manager with Falkirk Council and I have a remit for early years and primary.
Thanks, Lisa. Suzanne.
Hi there, I'm Suzanne McCafferty and I'm the head teacher at Bainsford Primary.
Thank you. Ian.
Hi, I'm Ian Livingston, head teacher at Braes High School.
Thank you. And Scott.
Hi everyone, Scott Lavery, Quality Improvement Officer within Falkirk Council.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Okay, let's begin. Can we begin by setting out what the improvement area was? Lisa, I believe you're going to start.
Yes, I'll start on that, and thank you. So I think on reflection in terms of what we wanted to just share today, really our improvement area was focused on two things. I think it was about self-evaluation and empowerment, and those were key and fundamental for us. I think our journey, like that of many others, began, we would reflect upon as being kind of post-pandemic, really, where there was, we felt, a need to reevaluate our system for self-evaluation and to rebuild from that experience of the pandemic to rebuild stronger and be more effective and perhaps even more systematic than perhaps we had been previously. We were very conscious that we had been prevented from working in a way that we were used to, which was that there was a high level of contact between central officers and our schools, and that resulted in us knowing our system really very well. We knew our schools very, very well. We had a really acute understanding of what our collective and individual improvement priorities needed to be. And therefore, when we were through that process and experience of the pandemic prevented from having that level of contact, I suppose there was that reinforcement of some of those ways of working that we highly valued. So our link QIOs were always very visible in schools, and that was deemed to be a core part of the work of those officers. And the link officer arrangement was always extremely effective in Falkirk, and the resultant outcomes from that were very positive. I think, though, having had the experience, as I say, of not being able to have that level of contact and not having that level of visibility during the pandemic, really provided us and many others with an opportunity to revisit and refresh our approach, and I suppose to examine what it was that we highly valued in our system and in our ways of working. It was an opportunity to re-examine our respective roles in terms of what central officers took responsibility for and needed to guide and needed to lead, and where our senior leaders would take responsibility for leading the system and leading improvement. We were really clear that any refreshed approach had to be about a consistency and had to bring about consistency. Part of our own self-evaluation at that time and the engagement and the dialogue that we had as central officers at that time highlighted some inconsistencies in terms of ways of working, be that within sectors or be that in terms of the way that individual QIOs were working. So we understood that any revised system needed to first and foremost bring about that level of consistency. And it also needed to be about proportionality. We knew that schools were going to emerge from the pandemic at different levels, and there was going to be different requirements and different needs, I suppose, in terms of that recovery piece, but also to make sure that we weren't compromising our ambitions out of the pandemic, and to lead schools and ourselves forward with that level of ambition and expectation around that. So previous work around self-evaluation with senior leaders has had significant impact, and there was in Falkirk a really high degree of confidence amongst our head teacher colleagues in terms of leading their own schools and own school communities, and our outcomes broadly were always very positive in that regard, both by our attainment measure, our inspection measures, etc. So that represented to us a really positive place to start. So our previous work around self-evaluation with senior leaders has always had a significant impact, and we understood that there was a high degree of confidence among our school leaders, our senior leaders, and cluster working, for example, was a very obvious way that empowerment and that ambitious leadership was able to be evident. And through that approach and through approaches of leading their own schools, we enjoyed and always have positive outcomes in Falkirk, be that through the attainment measure or, for example, through inspection outcomes. However, it was clear that to continue to move forward at the pace that we identified that we needed to have a self-improving system, and that any approach needed to connect leaders and by extension connect our schools with the centre and with each other. So across Falkirk, we knew that we were building on strong foundations shown by a range of outcome measures. Our data sets from work around our various contexts, our clusters, our neighbourhoods and our school level data helped us to understand the various contexts in which we were working. But we needed to build the work around this and I suppose systematise some of that work and bring about a framework that was going to presume collective ways of working rather than just without that expectation, expect that to happen consistently in the way that perhaps it was. So when we created our framework, we identified 2 clear strategic priorities, and those priorities have remained even now. And those were about improving the experiences of our learners across all sectors 3 to 18 and raising their attainment. These do remain our focus and provide a context even still for all of our improvement work. So we developed a new strategy that was focused on leadership of improvement. Initially, it was a senior leadership engagement strategy that really invited opportunities just to get together around areas of improvement and work together. And very quickly, it later became a senior leadership empowerment strategy that we called the SLES. So I'm going to hand over, if I could, Anne, to my colleague Scott, who's going to just say a wee bit more about the strategy itself and maybe just give examples of some of the ways that was implemented in practical terms.
Thanks, Lisa. And just building on what Lisa said, we needed to make a conscious shift towards intentional collaboration, not just kind of, forcing it to happen, but making sure that there was a real rigour and robustness around how we were going to work together. So at that system level, as Lisa said, the senior leadership empowerment strategy really articulated the expectations for our system-wide improvement. So as part of this collaborative work was done to define those specific roles for our senior leaders across all sectors in driving that strategic improvement for the benefits of all our learners in Falkirk. So the creation of the strategy was comprehensive and included a range of operational improvements, including clearer guidance, strengthening data sets and the use of data to make informed decisions, and those templates that support the recording and robustness of the conversations happening, all of which was aimed to bring cohesion and how we talk together about improvement across all sectors. Part of the strategy also led us to look at thematic reviews, which involved a small team for 1 or 2 days going into schools, and using that approach allowed us to reach into more schools and allowed us to visit them more regularly. And this engagement, although it was around agreed themes, it did allow for insights to be gained to self-evaluation and leadership as cross-cutting drivers for improvement. This approach also supported with service level priorities and fed into what we as a service were looking at as our next steps in terms of improvement, both in pedagogical practices and also in the outcomes for learners. We also focused on cluster and neighbourhood group working. Now, neighbourhood group working for us in Falkirk is around looking at schools with similar demographics, where there are similarities in terms of profiles, where head teachers and senior leaders can collaborate around work that's pertinent to where they're pertinent to the clientele and the children and families that they work with. This has always been regarded as part of our effective universal offer. But building on that level of commitment to both by senior leaders, we sharpened up the focus for cluster and neighbourhood group working by creating self-evaluation tools and guidance based around Higios and HigioELK to support improvement planning within those contexts. I'm going to now hand over to Suzanne, and Suzanne's going to give a bit more around one of the approaches which has had the most enduring impact within Falkirk.
Thanks, Scott. Certainly from my point of view, one of the most effective approaches that came from the Senior Leadership Empowerment Strategy was the creation of the Quality Associates programme. For me, as an experienced head teacher, it was something that I really wanted to be involved in. I'd been asking for something for like this, and it was the recognition from the senior leadership team at the centre that there are head teachers out there who are willing and have the expertise and the experience that can provide support and challenge to colleagues across the local authority in a more informal way, and more crucially, be a valuable extension of the central team. The training we undertook with Education Scotland was exceptionally beneficial, and they really encouraged us to be thinking about the importance of relationships. After all, it's a privilege to be welcomed into someone's school. What are learners' experiences like? What would I want to be a learner in this classroom? And what does the data tell us when we visit schools, and what is then done with it? Through this collaborative approach with colleagues, we were able to provide a lens for them to take any improvements forward. As we know our colleagues so well, we developed a framework to share so that whenever they were having a visit from any Equality Associates, they knew what to expect. There wasn't that fear of the unknown. Since undergoing the Quality Associates training in 2021, I've been involved in service improvement groups, one being self-evaluation, undertaking training with Education Scotland and our attainment advisor, and that training was then rolled out to all head teachers and deputy head teacher colleagues. As part of the quality improvement groups last year and this year, Quality Associates have led neighbourhood and cluster visits focusing on different quality indicators, which in turn have expanded the authority's capacity in both universal and targeted support. Overall, the impact has been that school leaders now take responsibility not just for their own establishment, but for system-wide improvement and strategic direction. And I'm going to hand back to Scott and Ian, who are going to talk a wee about any challenges and how they've overcome them.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask a quick question, or questions? The Quality Associates, is it voluntary? Getting involved as a Quality Associate? And
yes, it was.
A voluntary basis, okay. And my other question was to Scott, when you talked about the themes, and you said, I think you mentioned that these were negotiated. Any surprises there around the themes, or what influenced the themes? I suppose I'm interested in.
Yeah, and thanks for that question. I suppose the themes really focused around, as Lisa said, the kind of key aspects of our work as a local authority around improved experiences and improving attainment, and really keeping that focus around, I suppose, if you're thinking about it in terms of quality indicators, quality indicator 2.3 and quality indicator 3.2, and really focusing on how we are improving the experiences in the classroom for children, whilst at the same time that would then improve outcomes for learners through BGE and senior phase.
So if I could just ask a question around that, you mentioned that the quality associates as voluntary basis. Can you say a wee bit more about that?
So I think, Anne, the Quality Associates was an opportunity that we identified as a local authority for our experienced senior leaders. And we were very fortunate in Falkirk that we had a real blend of highly experienced head teachers coupled with newer head teachers and people who had been in the job for a wee bit of time and were gaining that experience. But this drive that we had to really make sure that our capacity at the centre was developed and broadened as widely as we possibly could do, really recognised, I suppose, that some of the informal support that was already happening in our system from these highly experienced head teachers, and they themselves were recognising the contribution that they were able to make, perhaps informally through their cluster or just with connections that had happened around areas of improvement. But it was informal, it was effective, but it was informal. And these colleagues had, I suppose, talked to us about their own experience and their own capacity, really, and their own will and ambition to more, in a more formal, perhaps more systemised way, just add to that framework that we had as a local authority. So the Quality Associates was in an attempt to recognise these colleagues and give some value to what they were doing in an informal way, but crucially to create a framework around that would bring about a level of consistency of approach and would bring about that, I suppose, that framework and that system that would allow us to really bed in and to rely upon the work that they did to strengthen what we were able to do as a quality improvement service and a quality improvement team.
That's really helpful, and it's really building on that experience and some of the work that was going on. Okay, well, I'm really interested to hear what Scott, I believe Scott and Ian's going to come in and start to talk about implementation and outcomes. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. I'm going to start by talking about some of the, I suppose, the challenges that we faced at local authority level around the developing framework that we put in place. And one of the biggest challenges was bringing together the wider intelligence we had across the service in order to make sure that we were being proportionate in our approach and to ensure there was sufficient scope within the system to provide effective targeted support for individual schools when required. So we have a universal offer in terms of what the quality improvement team provide, but it was looking at that next layer and what does an enhanced support look like, and then what does intensive support look like. So we were aware that central team members were supporting a range of schools for a range of different purposes. Some of this was informal and arose from relationships formed with our head teachers over many years. And while there was a high level of contact with schools, there wasn't always knowledge of the scale and type of support being offered. We developed a dashboard of support as a quality improvement team, which allowed us to look at that and look at an establishment and look at what support was in place, which showed where the support was being targeted and delivered. And again, what was the purpose and the impact? And what difference was it making for that setting? And that enabled us to have a more strategic response to addressing schools' unmet needs. in terms of what was coming up for different establishments. Was there themes coming through from that? And could we look at that in terms of, some work around some of the quality indicators, or in terms of pedagogical approaches, could we do some sort of professional learning, or could we provide support to a group of schools so we could target the resource much more evenly? And it led to a more effective, as I say, targeting of support. However, we did identify the need to really focus on some of our settings where performance was not where it should be, and our team around the setting approach brings together the link officer for the school, the data team, peers from our quality associates, and also professional learning team to provide that multi-strand tailored support for schools where a more targeted support is required. And it strengthened our leadership, sharpened our focus, and gave us the right interventions at the right time. I'm going to pass on to Ian now, who'll talk a bit more of that from a school's perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. And I suppose, building on some of the commentary from previously in the conversation just now, I think that one of the challenges that the empowerment strategy sought to address was, how do we bring about that consistency of our improvement work across all of the sectors within our system? And I certainly think that we have definitely benefited from there being direct involvement in the activity that Lisa and Scott and Suzanne have described by practitioners and leaders at all levels across early years, primary and secondary within Falkirk. And I think we'd all agree that no improvement or strategic change can ever be achieved, or probably even attempted, without considering that full educational journey of the young person. Those that are working in secondary, such as myself, we absolutely need to have a clear understanding of the learner's previous experiences. For those working at earlier stages of a young person's journey, we really need awareness of what's going to come in later years as well. And that cluster approach to improvement that was referred to earlier, that still stands strong to this day, has absolutely served us well in being able to support those aims. But as is that ability with those clear data sets that were referred to earlier, to see the journey of our young people and how they progress through the different ages and stages as well. I think similarly, as Suzanne outlined, that quality associate programme that enabled senior leaders, but also deputy head teachers as well, which was really important too in secondary schools, to explore those themes of critical reflection, engaging with Education Scotland and HMIE, as Suzanne mentioned, to really broaden and deepen our understanding. And I think in terms of practical outcome, I think that's really supported our approaches to validated self-evaluation across our schools in all sectors. Now, although that takes place in a number of different forms, the central component here has been that collaboration that we have between colleagues across our establishments, and senior and middle leaders also at the heart of this too. Now, building on that work, I think, has been the really effective support and challenge visits that we have to schools within Falkirk. Those senior leaders and the deputy head teachers involved in the Quality Associate programme, that's really enabled their expertise to be brought to bear in those support visits, again promoting the collaboration, that critical but also supportive reflection, and a greater understanding of the improvement priorities and strategies in each of our establishments. The empowerment approach that's been described as well, I think we also need to highlight it's also involved our class teachers and practitioners working directly with young people too. A good example of this would be the annual conference that takes place, led, designed and delivered by classroom practitioners, that focuses on sharing understandings within the senior phase courses. Obviously, we really utilise the knowledge and expertise of our SQA appointees in that regard, the setters, the markers within Falkirk. And I think those workshops and those conferences have been really helpful in developing a deeper and shared understanding of senior phase standards, but also building that staff confidence and introducing different aspects of the SEQF framework, which has been so crucial to broadening the offer to young people in that senior phase. But I suppose to conclude, what I think has been most encouraging in those developments is that those developments tend to then generate other steps forward as well within the authority. For example, that collaboration between senior leaders now extends to networks that are focused on curricular, learning and teaching, and attainment focused matters, as well as wellbeing too. Likewise, the forthcoming refresh of subject networks across our schools, that also builds upon that previous collaboration as well. So I think that focus on our practitioners at all levels and including them within this empowerment strategy has been really, really crucial in where we are just now as an authority, but also the potential we have to grow and develop further as well. However, we know that this is another growing process, and there also needs to be a focus on outcomes as well. So in that regard, I'll pass back to Lisa for some further discussion in that area.
Ian, could I just ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Around, you mentioned the quality associate visits, and it almost like validated self-evaluation, which, you know, we're familiar with. Did you use any particular frameworks?
We very much looked at particular quality indicators, a significant focus on 2.3 learning and teaching assessment and 3.2 attainment and achievement as well. But certainly what that enabled us to do was to have these support and challenge visits with each other within secondary schools, to perhaps have less of an emphasis on the gradings and the nomenclature that goes around where a school is, but a far more formative experience where we're able to almost provide a training ground and a testing ground for colleagues to work with each other, to critically reflect, but also to have that support, to have the conversations between colleagues that people are comfortable having, without feeling that there's an overbearing scrutiny above you. And it allowed you to be able to really be upfront and honest for the betterment of outcomes and experiences for the young people within our schools.
Thank you very much, Ian. That was really helpful. Lisa, you were going to talk a wee bit more about that subject.
So yes, and thanks, Ian. And I suppose just to add to what Ian has set out there, and I think has pointed to the impact and the outcomes of this work that has been developed and I think strengthened and I think deepened over a period of time. I think it is about creating a system of system leaders, and I do feel very strongly, and I know this from the conversations that we have with our senior leaders, that our senior leaders in Falkirk see themselves as that. They see themselves as improving the system for all of Falkirk's children and young people. And that may seem very obvious, and it may seem, you know, that's what we would expect, but actually there has been a conscious cultivation of that. I think it's to do with the quality of the people that we have, absolutely, but also that real focus and that real setting out of expectations around how it is that we can work together through an empowered system to share improvement work for the benefit of everybody and all learners, but to apply that and contextualise that to your own setting. And colleagues, as everybody has set out, Suzanne and Ian have described, colleagues really giving of their time willingly out with their own school to go in and spend time really talking and listening to colleagues in another school about their improvement journey, about what matters to them, examining data sets from somebody else's school. We would recognise that is a challenge, and you need to, you know, have certain skills and certain abilities to be able to do that, and to do that well, and to engage then meaningfully in conversation with others about their improvement. So that whole work and that whole expectation just aggregates up to something that is really, as a system, quite powerful. And I suppose just to go back to an earlier point about the quality associates, and that was a key focus initially at that time, and really has broadened and strengthened our work, and people do regard the quality associates as system leaders, and will expect that in forums that we set up to do improvement work, that the quality associates will play a key role within that. But we over time have added to the group as well, so that kind of perpetuating and that belief that we have that adds a great deal to the system is quite well embedded. And head teachers and others have expressed a desire to eventually come into that cohort and do that work. The other impact, I suppose, that we do want to point to is, I suppose, the kind of more conventional measures of outcomes, and we, in that regard, are very much an improving system by those measures. We do have positive attainment pictures in Falkirk at all levels. That is both through our kind of ASIL data and our secondary school SQA attainment. We continue to enjoy positive outcomes from external scrutiny, and all of that is always considered to be an opportunity for improvement. So we do, as a system, really consider what that tells us about ourselves. We share the information. We consider what learning points we need to think about for a school, but also more widely as a system. And I think there is a great deal of motivation within leaders to be able to work in that way. And largely what has led to that has been in a really strong belief over time of empowerment, and that being very genuinely felt, a very conscious approach to cultivating that, and also giving people the opportunities to work in that way. And when they do, valuing very highly what the outcome of those discussions are actually telling us as a system that then feeds into our wider service improvement work. So I'm going to just move on, if I could, and pass over to Scott, because as you would expect, over the piece, things have progressed and things have changed slightly. So Scott's just going to just say a wee bit about maybe where we are more currently with all of this.
Thanks, Lisa. And as you said, yes, our work continues to evolve. And at the moment, we're currently refining our officer deployment in consultation with senior leaders through our reference groups to align with best value and updated priorities for us as a service. We're improving the rigour of feedback provided to schools and strengthening the evaluation of professional learning. So really making sure that what we're doing is aligning to our priorities. We're also expanding our leadership pathways to ensure coherence from early career teachers through to system leaders, and reviewing collaborative groups to ensure they contribute meaningful to raising attainment. We will refocus our thinking on supporting middle leaders and examine with them their contribution towards raising attainment priorities. We've talked a lot about the importance of collaboration and working with senior leaders, and I think that's a key theme for us moving forward into next session. Really focusing on collaborative groups, both cross-sectorally, but also sector-specific. So we're really focusing in on improvements that are required for us as a service, but also what's pertinent to different sectors, for instance, our early years settings or our primary and secondary settings as well. A real strength and a real success over the past two sessions in terms of what we've changed and moved forward has been our professional learning collaboratives that have been set up to support heads of establishment to be really clear on the strengths and next steps in their establishments based on really robust self-evaluation and understanding of the quality indicators. Where we are now is we're starting to look at how these collaborations can support settings post-inspection, and as Lisa said, we are getting positive inspection results, but there are still clear next steps for settings to look at, and we want to use the collaboratives and the real positive experience that they've had within our framework to focus on what do they do next and how do they learn from each other, and really focus on how have they acted upon the inspection and what impact is that having on learners. In terms of work for next session, we're clearly aligning priorities now more around pedagogy and curriculum, and targeting our improvement work more at our practitioners to help them to understand their role and what highly effective practice should look like in all our establishments. I'm now going to pass over to Ian, and Ian's going to give some advice to other local authorities who may be tackling similar improvement areas.
Well, I'm not quite sure I would term it as advice. I'm not sure I would be as brash enough to term it as advice. But what I think we can certainly say is that our reflections on our experience through this empowerment strategy is, and a lot of the activities that we've described over the last wee while here just now, people from other authorities will be thinking, well, that we do that, we do things like that as well. So we're not suggesting anything we're doing is earth-shattering or strategically brand new. But what we are saying here is it's ours, and it's something that's been developed in line with our Falkirk principles, and it's something that we've generated ourselves through collaboration. And I think that what that's given us is that sort of collective agency within ourselves to work together towards, yes, the authority overarching directives, but Scott's outlined previously, making sure that's tailored to our own individual settings and demographics as well. I think what we've also got from it is that feeling of collective enterprise amongst us as senior leaders within the school, and we absolutely are bought into that principle of system-wide improvement. I think that while we absolutely know that healthy competition between schools is a good thing, and it does drive us on there as well, we all know that we have a vested interest in Falkirk Council being a really, really strong place to have your young person educated from when they're a wee tiny person to the minute that they leave secondary school as well. And I think that's what this has given us, is that shared understanding of our standards, our principles, our language, our procedures, our routines, and that's been really helpful in solidifying some of the work that Lisa was describing was happening pre-pandemic, but is now part of the fabric of what we do within Falkirk.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Really interesting hearing about your journey and where you are now, and how you're building on that work. As I said, it's been some time since we visited, so it's really interesting to hear where you are now and the advice that you would give to others. A few things standing out towards the end here around that collaboration, that empowerment and commitment to continuous improvement, and your work with others to take that work forward. So all that remains is to extend my sincere thanks to you all for taking the time to discuss your work on support and improvement through self-evaluation and quality assurance. I wish you well in your continued work in this improvement area and other areas of work. Thank you.